And welcome to the Media Roundtable Industry Edition. If you've been keeping up with us, we've spent the last few years talking to leading voices in the podcast space about what they create, why they create it, and the impact they want it to have on the world. This is a true roundtable format, and like we say in the name, this is our industry edition. So it's going to be a little less focused on creators and more about how media and audio industry experts can adapt to the news of the day. Today, Dan is out, so I'm your host, Jennifer Laine. I'm head of marketing and special projects at Oxford Road, and I'm joined by a few of my fellow agents of influence. Welcome to the show, Charisse Miller, a senior account lead director at Oxford Road. Also, welcome back, Stu Redwine, VP of Creative Services at Oxford Road, and Kyle Jelinek, senior account lead director at Oxford Road, also editor-in-chief of The Influencer. We couldn't be more excited to have all of you guys here with us today. So without further ado, let's dive in. Welcome to the Media Roundtable. This week, we have a lot of great media that we wanted to talk through. The first is an article related to you, Kyle. It is about 3 solutions to podcast ad frequency and the problems surrounding that. And if you guys remember, we talked about this on the last episode. Kyle and Dan disagreed completely. And there have been some updates on this in the last couple of weeks that we wanted to share with you. Kyle, do you want to pop in and start discussing this?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the biggest take here, well, first of all, this comes from Westwood One, and what they're saying is based on the data that they're getting from pixel tracking partners, they're seeing that conversions going down in the podcast space. And the assumption that they're making is it's because we're running too much frequency. And that may be the case. I haven't seen that necessarily with my clients with conversion rates going down. What we are seeing though is a bombardment of copy and spots being put into the podcast. And I think the reason conversion is going down is because we're diluting the space. And it's not necessarily indicative of running too much frequency on the shows. In fact, I would even venture to say that it requires more frequency to combat the more advertisers that we have going into podcasts these days. And add to that dynamic insertion creeping into the space at record levels right now. Like the baked in ads, you didn't need as much frequency. With dynamic insertion, you do. And that's what we're seeing here. It's not necessarily what their assumption is. So the whole article, I think, is based on a false read on the metrics.
Oh, interesting. Okay, so Charisse, I know you work on a couple of accounts at Oxford Road as well. What are you seeing in this space? What sort of perspective or comments do you have to add here?
Yeah, I mean, I do think that there's some merit in what's being said, within the article. One of the main ideas that it centers around is effective frequency, right? Which is the number of times that a consumer has to be exposed to a particular ad before they, respond or take an action. You go above that magic number and theoretically then you have too much exposure, at which point you start to see those diminishing returns. And as a result, your ad dollars go to waste. And I think, the solution here is, and what they're trying to get across is, there is a balance of frequency and reach. You absolutely want to be cognizant, of frequency and be aware of that, if you're diluting your message too much, because there is somewhat of a waste. But on the reach side of things, we also have to consider, the actual universe size of our audience that we're attempting to reach and employ certain measures to maximize that.
We have a few, I guess, recurring topics that we will start paying. This is one of them. Of course, we're going to dive into sort of the Elon Twitter saga at some point. We haven't dipped our toe into that yet because there are a few who are doing it better than us. But one more topic that we've talked about a little bit is the forthcoming recession, whether we're already in it, if we haven't started it yet, and where brands are going to begin cutting their marketing dollars. There was a really interesting article this week in Insider Intelligence that we'll share it in our show notes and on our website and on our social channels because it's rich with data and you kind of have to look through everything to see it. But I pulled out a few key pieces. It says 1 in 5 marketers have already cut their spending per new advertising perceptions data. Budgets decreased on average by 6%, and upper funnel campaigns have seen the biggest cuts, with 45% of marketers surveyed suspending connected TV, 44% halting digital video, and 42% pausing linear TV. It's super interesting. I mean, this is great news for us as a performance market. It's not great news for anyone. first of all. Recessions are bad for everyone. But as a performance marketing agency, at Oxford Road, I think like this is an area where I believe we could still provide a lot of specialty as brands go through and sort of take a look at how much they're investing into just building that top of funnel brand awareness and transitioning some of those cutting those dollars entirely or transitioning some of those to more of a performance marketing strategy. Some of the other data said that by the conclusion of the fourth quarter, 4 out of 5 respondents expect to reactivate their budgets, but their strategies will shift. 50% of marketers will change their messaging tactics, and first-party data will become important as they prioritize keeping current clients over acquiring new ones. And I think this is one of the most interesting elements in that last bit, a real focus on customer retention rather than customer acquisition, but using marketing dollars to do that. This article was a great read. I can't recommend it more, but I think you're going to see brand messaging shift. You're obviously already starting to see brand spend shift. And I wonder what the long-term effects are going to be when it comes to sort of top of mind brand awareness, if we're going to see smaller players emerge into bigger players and bigger players shrink back to smaller players based on how people are choosing to spend for awareness and continue building that funnel top to bottom all the way through the recession. What do you think about this, Kyle? And Stu, also, I would love to hear your opinions as you do a lot of brand and creative. I don't want to put you on the spot, but Kyle, I know you have some thoughts here.
Yeah, I mean, we mentioned this last time, but everything's changing. And when you see an economic downturn, it's all going to come down to performance. Like you said, that is a good thing for our agency, but it's also not good for anybody. But being able to tie back ad dollars to performance is going to be more important than ever. And the tactics that we use to get those, to get that information is going to change. And, you know, linear TV obviously is being cut big time, but areas like podcasts is seeing still pretty decent growth. Streaming audio with the advent of pixels and the ability to track with streaming audio, I've seen massive growth over there. So things are shifting, and obviously it's hitting some advertisers differently. You know, I saw this back in 2008 when I was in local radio, and all of our advertisers were mortgage companies, right? And then they all disappeared in one night. And we took a hit for a while, and months later, everything kind of shifted, and all those mortgage companies, then the biggest thing was loan remodifications and stuff like that. You know, all the mortgage companies became loan mods. So like
transformed,
and now we're going to get you out of it. And that's the beauty of advertising, is like it will correct and it will shift. And the players are going to shift, the tactics are going to shift, but all in all, I think we're going to see growth here in the space in the coming months.
And I know there's always been, and it's not even just in times of recession, a very specific difference in creative messaging between building brand awareness and acquiring clients, or customers. Stu, what sort of, I don't know if this is an audiolytics question in the call to action in the end, but what key differences do you think we'll be seeing in messaging?
Yes, absolutely. I think a couple of things. I think that when it comes to a time where, let's call it a recession, inflation, stagflation, what I keep waiting for somebody to coin a phrase, some combination of those two, because it's weird because unemployment is down, but inflation is up. So it's like this weird post-pandemic space we haven't been in necessarily before. But yeah, the difference I see is one way of viewing advertising is trading time for money or money for time. And so now we're going to be seeing value-based messages. Also, this is the time that without fail, we roll out the messaging for marketers and for brands. Don't stop advertising in a recession. Don't stop advertising when times are tough, because you come out ahead. As for the mixture of awareness versus activation, or brand awareness versus activation, Les Benet has done a ton of work in that space, and it tends to hold that in general, there's a balance of how much activation versus how much brand you want to do that kind of holds for all time. And something I wanted to remark on with this story and the last one, Byron Sharp's work and how brands grow, that's related as well, is that most users of a brand are light users, and that you want to be getting new users all the time. And so this idea of retention or hardcore users and getting those people to buy more and more and more and more and more, in general, it looks like over the long haul, always having some kind of outbound sales force, which is what your advertising is, at all times going. In the best of times or in the worst of times, you're going to come out ahead. But to specifically answer your question, I think the big trade you're going to see is value, value, value. Everyone's going to be talking about value, and whoever can stay in and continue to advertise when white space gets created, they're going to come out ahead at the end of whatever this liminal phase is that we're in.
The next article is yours, and we're changing topics sort of entirely.
Yes.
Some new announcements have been made
That's
recently.
my style.
It's your style, based on your the flow of our episode this week is like exemplary of your shirt.
Thank you.
I love it. So there are some forthcoming changes to podcast searchability. Tell us what this means. Tell us who's doing it. Tell us what it means for listeners and for brands.
Yeah, absolutely. So Evo Terra does a fun podcast. It's podcast pontifications. That's a good one to listen to. There aren't like a ton of podcasts out there for the podcast advertising space. So I just wanted to call them out. Like one is Evo Terra's podcast pontifications, Pod News, Sounds Profitable, The Download, which is also by Sounds Profitable, and then of course the Media Roundtable. But like listening to all of those on a weekly basis, it really helps fill you in on the space. But Evo Terra was talking about the searchability of podcasts. So right now it's like I go on to Spotify or wherever I get my podcasts, and it's like turning on DirecTV and there's 800 channels, and it's like, oh man, what, until you know it cold, it's like, what? Oh, I need to go to the 700s to watch it. I don't even know what's in the 700s on DirecTV, but whatever. It's like, I need to go to this section to find that. So podcast searchability, there's Apollo is what Evo Terra was talking about. That's a way to search fiction shows. All I want to do is see fiction shows. Or maps.fm sounds really cool. So let's say you're going to, like Evo was talking about, he's going to Ireland. What are podcast episodes about where he's going? So it's like, oh, you're learning about that place when you're there. But the idea of being able to search by genre and narrowly by genre, in that, like, I know I only want to hear true crime shows. So who is going to do the curation so that I know I'm getting the best true crime shows, and I'm not spending my time going and searching aimlessly. I mean, I think that's how the space has to evolve, right? Because again, that idea of trading time and money, none of us want to give up our time going, if I don't have to. So there's a need there. There's a market need there to just go, I just want to hear the Star Trek podcast, where the best absolute Star Trek podcast. Or I was trying to talk to one of my daughter's friends about like anime, and just trying to find like the source for the best anime podcast was very, very challenging. So somebody listening wants to make the anime podcast channel to curate those. I think there's white space there, at least for one person, which is me.
Oh, or it's Kyle, because he also has some thoughts on podcast searchability. It seems like this is really just a benefit for listeners, maybe for creators. If you found that your podcast has been hard to find historically on iTunes or on Spotify, is that right or is that wrong?
No, I think increasing discoverability in podcasts is going to make it better for the content creators. I mean, right now, unless you sign up with one of the big players like an iHeart, who actually can run radio commercials to promote your podcast, or Spotify, who's going to actively have it in their algorithm, it's hard to get a podcast picked up and have people who are really interested and would love to hear it like show up on the radar. So I love the fact that they're exploring these types of things. We put a thing in the Influencer a couple of weeks ago about a company using AI to do just that. And not only with the content of the show, which is a little bit, overall subjective, literally scrub through the transcripts. And if somebody's talking about SG guitars and who plays them, it'll show 20 different podcasts where that was discussed. And if I was really into that, maybe I am, I would be able to see that. So I think as technology kind of increases and we're able to dig into the content itself, it's going to help not only the people who want to consume the podcast, but the people creating the stuff. I think it'll be, it's a bright future. It looks good.
And I think from a messaging standpoint, it's what can help out is, and what does help out is that as you find a genre that works for you, the more you can customize to it, the more persuasive your messaging is going to be. So, the possibility I hear that I see here is that, like, okay, well, once I know that localization or fiction really works for me, then let's do something, like the Postmates ads that they've been doing that are awesome in podcasts, where they lean in and they make it like a fake true crime podcast commercial, but it's for Postmates with when all you can burgers is think about.
Yeah.
So it's working for fiction. Well, then you could look at Apollo's entire, like, let's say Apollo's the fiction podcast channel. You could look at Apollo's complete list of shows and know that you can plug that messaging in there. So it kind of helps you in narrowing in your messaging as opposed to taking like a broad brush approach.
Yeah. And I was even thinking that, he mentioned on the podcast you're referring to the challenge with some of the broad genres within the Apple's genre classification, like society and culture, right, encompasses so many different types of podcasts. It's impossible really to distinguish.
How do you customize a message to society and culture?
Yeah, So this is interesting. I'm excited.
If you're excited, I'm excited. Something else I'm as a person excited for, as somebody who is head of marketing, a little less excited, but supportive, I guess. We have gotten away with so much for far too long. We built a marketing system based on sort of unfair data capture, and we let that ride. And now Congress is starting to pass bills that will not let that happen anymore. And in regards to overall sort of user mental or customer mental health and sustainability, I think it's the right decision. But there was an interesting article on Wired this week that talks about how Congress may pass a good privacy bill, stating that generally companies would only be allowed to collect and use data if it's necessary for one of 17 permitted purposes spelled out in the bill. But it encapsulates things like authenticating users, preventing fraud, and completing transactions, but everything else is prohibited. So in contrast, this type of online piracy regimen most people are familiar with, which is based on consent, which is just, yes, you can have any of my data that you want as long as I'm able to use this, click yes, move on, or click no and turn off cookies entirely. So what's interesting is like this is one of the first bills that's completely bipartisan, that has equal support on both sides of the aisle, and it looks like it's going to go through. For marketers, we have to have a slight shift in strategy as to how we are going to understand more about our customers, but I think it's a step in the right direction, absolutely. And now we just need to get more creative into figuring out what that might look like. And so, Charisse, I know you have some clients that have historically relied on sort of a heavy data capture in the past. And what are you hearing about their new plan moving forward?
Yeah, I think, the evolution of these privacy laws are, like you said, they're really highlighting, the need for more creative ways to gather information about your target audience and test what really speaks to them. So, instead of utilizing, collected user data like geolocation and consumption patterns on the back end to inform your decisions, you might use a multivariate testing platform like Marpipe, right? That way you can test right at the front end user level, right, for a couple of weeks and get some super valuable data at the source that, doesn't necessarily need to encroach on areas that are privacy protected. And we're seeing a lot of, success in utilizing those kinds of learnings from testing platforms like that.
And Stu, I know you have been working with Marpipe for a number of our clients at the agency. What can you share about how it has allowed you to understand the customer messaging and the customer funnel process?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's that if you say we're taking any sort of data away or targeting away, it's like all of a sudden I'm flying blind, which is maybe a little extreme, but let's just say that that's the case. Then the next tool in my toolkit is like creative. So if I had the capability of testing a whole bunch of creative very quickly, I can hone in on which creative works, and that fills in the blind spot that I've got from my targeting. So that's exactly what Marpipe does. They're near and dear to us, awesome partners of the agency, and we've been able to translate a bunch of multivariate learnings from digital, where we test all kinds of different messaging and different imagery, like hundreds of ads in just a couple of weeks, no time. It's like, it's all the necessary parts are automated to make it easy. And then we're able to take that and apply that over into audio. And like, let's just say you couldn't target, you couldn't know things. What you can see is what messaging is working, and then draw conclusions from that. And that's what Marpipe empowers you to be able to do. And then, like I said, they even did a case study on it. We could put that in the show notes, of translating learnings from digital, from visual copy and imagery back into audio. And there's a nice case study of the work we did with Moink, where we go, oh, okay, this is what we see is working. Let's test that at an audio, and it worked. We saw an improvement in meaningful improvement in results in audio.
And speaking of testing 100 different tactics in ways you couldn't possibly track, your next article is related to being the ultimate influencer, which yes. I feel like if you're the ultimate influencer, you've definitely tested everything to find out what works for your audience, and then have used that to get as many additional followers as possible. Right or wrong?
Yeah, exactly. That's right. You're willing to try anything if you're the ultimate influencer. And yeah, this story is about Logan Paul, that he is now the WWE's ultimate influencer. And what it brought to mind for me is sort of this question that comes up where, he's got a podcast, right? So let's say you're buying his show. What is it worth for a brand? Particularly performance, and in the lane that we're in most often, to go, hey, I'm an influencer. Not only will I mention you on the podcast, I'll call you out on Instagram. I'll do this. I mean, we had Mike Tyson. Was it Mike Tyson, Kyle?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
We had Mike Tyson mention a client on the Late Show. The late
one
show.
Of them, one of the late night shows. Yeah.
And it's like, how much? Oh, wow. You got Mike Tyson say that. Okay. So let's say you could get Logan Paul at his next wrestling match to call out your client. What is that worth? What are those additional call outs worth outside of the performance media buy? And so it's more of a media question, but I love it. Oxford Road, media messaging and measurement always work together. So I always think of it holistically. So I really think I put in this story as a question really for Kyle and Charisse to go, what are those additional mentions worth? What would it be worth for Logan Paul to shout out one of your clients' names from the wrestling ring as he flies into the air and delivers a body slam?
Well, I think the question is, who's the influencer? Logan Paul, I would not give him anything. But
okay, theoretically,
if this was Tim Ferriss, that's a different story. What kind of weight does influencer hold to the audience? In my assessment of Mr. Paul's work, not a whole lot with him, but depending on the person, I think it can be worth quite a lot. And we've done some experiments with some of our key influencers in the podcast space, testing out their newsletters, testing out like giveaways of products, through their email distribution lists, and they can be very, very effective. From my perspective, maybe I have a myopic view of everything, but it starts with the podcast and then we look kind of elsewhere outside of that. But I don't know. What do you think, Charisse? Are you seeing anything with your clients?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think it's great. We're having more and more ability to get creative with our talent integrations beyond just, your standard 60-second podcast read. We're able to build out 360 campaigns that integrate the social components, live events, etc. While that's great, I think that when it comes specifically to performance marketing, where you're looking for that directly quantifiable return on every dollar you spend, that you have to have a lot more discernment, right? That comes with like making these kinds of deals and negotiating these kind of packages. Big names can come with, pretty hefty price tag. And so in a scenario where an advertiser is purely concerned with performance KPIs, I'm not sure that I see it so much worth it on my end. I think it's kind of just important to set expectations and understanding as far as that direct accountability goes. You can drive some direct performance, but I think largely what I'm seeing that these kinds of plays are good for are branding and driving a halo effect and more long-term lift for your business, versus immediate quantifiable results.
So if we're entering a time where immediate quantifiable results are more what's is going to be most important, then kind of spare me the bells and whistles. I just need to know the hard hitting performance data on this individual show. Is that what you're saying is going to matter most here?
Well, when I see these packages, they're almost always overvalued, like massively. They put a lot of weight to what they expect this to do for a brand. And at the end of the day, as a performance marketer, like Charisse said, I got to see an incremental lift in performance based on whatever we did here. But what I've seen work is partnering with influencers like this that we have a proven track record with. We want to expand that audience. That seems to be a better route than, hey, we're going to start out and test this with this 360 campaign. It's almost like phase 2 of integrating with an influencer. Yeah.
And talking about integrating with an influencer and hard-hitting performance data for individual, not shows, substitute players. We move on to Kyle, your article, as it talks about the MLB adding logos to their uniforms.
Yeah, I mean, is nothing sacred? America's pastime is going to look like a NASCAR event.
I'd like to thank Goodyear Tires and Sunoco Fuel and all my friends over at Allstate Insurance.
I mean, it's funny because, the MLB has been trying to sell every bit of their stadiums for years now. But for the very first time, they're putting logos on uniforms. And people are in an uproar. And I want to know, like, what you guys thought about this. Is it sacred? Are we crushing?
I don't think so.
No,
I mean, fine. Whatever, fine. It should be sacred. But I mean, look at a golfer. If you're a top 10 golfer, you make north of $3 million on your hat annually. So, I mean, it is a missed opportunity for revenue for teams if they're able to sell that sponsorship space. And if you're a fan, you're already used to it. You may not see it in the NBA or NFL or the MLB, but it is happening in more places than just NASCAR. And as someone who watches golf every Friday, Saturday, Sunday, generally, at least the highlights, I don't think it detracts from the experience at all. Tennis is another great example where sponsorship in tennis, I don't think detracts from the experience, but adds an additional revenue opportunity for players.
So
I would be curious to know where the money will be going. Will it be going to the MLB? Will it be going to the teams? Will the players receive any of that? Or are the players just still open to have offline sponsorship deals where they're sponsored by Rolex or a spokesperson or ambassador? So I didn't see that in the article. I don't know if it's been announced publicly yet.
Well, yeah, in the article they mentioned the Padres were the first to close the deal with Motorola and putting Motorola on their uniform. So it appears that it's going to be team-based and not necessarily going to the individual players. But I guess it remains to be seen. Pandora's box has been opened, and we'll see what happens.
I mean, I do think that the NBA and the NFL will likely follow soon thereafter if this goes well.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, soccer was the first to do it here in the States. And I mean, like you said, we see it everywhere in golf. But, the difference about golf and, even NASCAR for that point, it all goes to the driver or the golfer. This is a little bit different. So these individual players now are going to be wearing Motorola hats, or at least a hat.
Well, they'll still be wearing Dodger hats. They'll just be Dodger collab.
Who should sponsor the Dodgers? Let's roundtable real quick.
Oh my gosh. Allstate Insurance, because they have a blue logo.
Oh, that makes sense. I think Farmer John, because I grew up listening to Dodgers on the radio, and it was always sponsored by Farmer John smoked sausages. So that's what I'm hoping for.
Anything's
tires.
possible.
Goodyear tires.
Okay.
I'm thinking, because of NASCAR. As a NASCAR light fan, I'm just curious. I want to dig in on this. Why are the cars covered? Why and how and why that sport? And why not? It's like, this seems novel in these other sports, but you go. So anyway, I'll come back. I will report back to the media roundtable.
On our next episode.
Why has that been the
2
trope?
minutes at the start?
Yeah, why has that been the trope? And now pretty soon everybody's finally, decades later is going to follow suit. You could say, Jennifer, this show is not sponsored by Goodyear
This
tires.
show is not sponsored by anyone yet.
Yes. Yeah, there you go. But
To
Goodyear
all you
tires,
marketers out there, you can have our hat, you can have our jersey, you can have a commercial in the middle of the run. As always, this show is dedicated to our mission of mobilizing marketers to advance truth and civility in journalism. We want you to not just know about the news, but use it for good. If you're a marketer looking to balance your business objectives with your brand values, please reach out to our agency, Oxford Road, by visiting oxfordroad.com and subscribing to our weekly newsletter, The Influencer. Thank you to Bianca, Kyle, Stu, Dan, and the team at Podcast One. And as always, influence responsibly.